Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Lear ISO 45001 implementation training. I appreciate you guys being here. Um, you're going to experience some very phenomenal looking slides, and there might even be an animation or two. But the goal of this training is not to experience my slides, and I do hope you've been able to print off the training materials and have the stuff in front of you. We've got two basic goals here. Is we want to kind of explain the framework of the ISO 45000 standard, which basically mirrors the ISO 14001 standard, and then explain how to implement Lear's occupational health and safety management system. Very similar to what they did with 14000. They developed some templates that took the 45,000 requirements in 14 and integrated them into one manual at least. And part of the work here is going to be to upgrade your environmental system to a environmental health and safety system. So while these slides may be very interesting and dynamic, what I need you guys to do is ask questions. A few of these slides I'm just going to clip through pretty quickly because I just wanted to put stuff in front of you so you saw it. But when we get to something that doesn't make sense or you have a question on, that's what I want to hear about. And I don't want you to wait for a break because we won't take many. I don't want you to wait till a pause. Just unmute yourself and ask the question, because every question you ask is going to be of great value to everybody else on the call. So please, 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 I don't want to talk to myself or my computer for 4 hours. I need to hear from you guys. So that's the goal. Again, a lot of you guys are pretty familiar with the ISO 14000 standard. And again, the ISO 45000 standard is very similar, but it deals with occupational health and safety. Top priority, I think it's safety. I think the priorities here is safety, the customer, and then the environment. Those are your three priorities. And safety, in my mind, is number one. So let's remember that. Economics, again, the whole ISO 45001 process is set up to manage risk. So our goal when we develop our documentation is to be able to identify potential risk and find ways to reduce the risk. That's what this program is all about. Most organizations are going from what I call an OSHA-based program where they just want to be in compliance with the OSHA rules, and now they migrate toward a management system. And again, currently Lear's safety program is more of a hybrid because you guys have a lot of the components of a management system already in place. So that's the good news here. The good news is the corporate folks have put together the templates. You guys already have a lot of the stuff in place. So it's just a matter of connecting the dots between what the standard requires and what you're already doing in many cases. And again, everybody wants to get to this, and there's that animation for you. Everybody wants to get to this concept of a safety culture where safety just happens as a part of our business. And again, I think, further integrating this as a management system will help push Lear up that ladder. And again, with your program already in place, a lot of these benefits you've already realized. But I think as part of the putting this system together, you'll be surprised at the things that will come to light as part of some of these things that the standard requires. So even though you may already have a good safety program, this is going to really help improve the process as well. And again, for you safety professionals, this is a pretty familiar curve, but where we're trying to get to is a process where again, people want to follow the rules instead of they have to follow the rules. And as we develop the safety culture, it should ultimately reduce injuries and make you guys the employer of choice. That's what the buzzword is. If we have a safety culture, people want to work for Lear. Benefits for certification, again, at this point, I believe most of you are not going to immediately pursue certification. I think the immediate plan for Lear is to develop a compliant occupational health and safety management system, and I believe they're targeting to have this completed by the end of this year. That's the rumor I've heard. And again, the one site that I know of, I know there's some European sites that are already certified, and the seat assembly plant in Duncan, South Carolina, they're already certified as well. So certification is coming. I think is the other automakers make this a requirement, it'll be coming your way. Again, as I said, the Lear program currently is, I call it a quasi management system. You've already got controls in place. You've done some job hazard assessments and some risk assessments. You have some type of safety committees. You're doing OSHA-based training. You have an incident reporting and corrective action process. You track performance metrics, and then you do review this stuff with your management team. So now it's some of these things you may be doing, but you may need to enhance just to meet the ISO 45001 requirement. And again, as far as health and safety management standards go, the ISO people kind of ignored health and safety, I think, for a long time. But there were a number of other programs out there. There was the OSAS 18001 standard, ANSI Z10, the famous OSHA VPP programs. And so these systems have been around for a while. And it wasn't until 2013 that the ISO folks developed the 45001 standard. And again, they took the best parts of ANSI Z10, 18000, and put it into that basic ISO format. And again, I think I said the same thing, but I like the colors, so we got some colors here. So again, this has been a progression of different standards being developed, progression of things moving toward health and safety. And again, it was nice to see the ISO people finally embrace health and safety in 2018. In your training materials, I gave you the full comparison between the three standards. But what's very nice is that they've aligned all three standards for quality, environmental, and safety in the same 10 sections. And oftentimes when you hear the things like risk and opportunities, intended outcomes, a lot of these words and topics and things mean the same thing. So they've made it very easy to integrate, in your case, environmental and safety management into the same process. So from a certification perspective, that is made pretty easy. Risk management, again, all three standards require you guys to identify risk and opportunities. Risk and opportunities. You'll see that in all three standards. There is an ISO guidance document out there called ISO 31000. It's just titled Risk Management. And it really explains the whole concept of how to identify risk, control it, reduce it. I only mention this because it really makes for a nice read on any type of risk. And this document doesn't deal with just health and safety. Again, it's nothing that you're certified to or required to read. I just like to remind people that it's out there. And if you're trying to truly build some risk management processes, okay, so somebody says chat. Montgomery is on. I thought, okay, Montgomery is in the house. Who's that? Jeremy Edwards and his team. Thank you for letting me know. I appreciate that. Okay. And that's what I thought it was. I thought it was a time zone thing, and I apologize for that. So anyways, again, this is just out there. If you choose to look it up, good for you. Okay, so now what have I done? Okay. As far as risk, you know, we've got risk of hazards, financial risk, operational risk, strategic risk. What's that? Well, maybe that's the we want to be the employer of choice. If we're known as a company that injures people, that won't help us hire people, and that again goes to our reputation, and then our ultimate ability to be in compliance with whether it's the OSHA rules or any other safety regulations. So these would be the types of risks that we're trying to manage. Okay, so that's your warm up to get you in the ISO 45001 mood. Hopefully you kind of get where we're coming from. And now what Lear did was took their environmental program and has updated it to reflect the requirements of the health and safety management system requirements. So most of you, if you know about your environmental documentation, you're familiar with the EMM procedures. Well, all of those are going to be replaced by the EHSMM procedures. Pretty catchy buzz acronym there. So all of the procedures that you built for environmental are going to be transitioned to the new EHSMM procedures. And again, Lear has developed the templates for these, and I believe they're on the, if you call it Everyone Lear, Lear One, Lear Net system. So these are all documents that you're able to download. And again, there's some additional procedures that have been updated, an appendix, but the nice thing is all of your plant level documentation doesn't need to change. If you've got a lockout tagout procedure, if you've got a form for hot work permit, I mean, all of those pieces and parts of your health and safety system remain valid and do not need to change. So that we're just going to connect the dots to what we're doing. Okay. A few of the key definitions here: occupational health and safety, objective. It's kind of the overall arching goals for your program. The two that I want to really talk about is a worker is anybody that is performing work on behalf of the organization. Participation is involving employees in the decision-making process. So there's a whole section in ISO 45000 on employee participation and things that they must participate in. And this could be one of these areas where you have to kind of enhance what you're already doing, either from an action perspective or just from how you document things. And then there's consultation, and this is where we seek the employee's views before we make a decision. And again, in the standard, there's a bunch of areas where we have to consult with our employees. And this is another area where you may have to enhance the way that you're already doing things. The workplace is any a place under the control of the organization. We're going to hear this term risk and opportunities, risk reduction, hierarchy of controls. How do we reduce risk? And they define occupational health and safety risk as a combination of the likelihood of an occurrence and the resulting severity of the injury. And again, it's likelihood. It's not the worst case. You know, if I drink too much water, I ultimately could die, but that's not the likely severity. So keep that in mind, because part of this process is there's going to be a risk assessment process you have to go through. And again, keep that word likely in mind. What's the likelihood of it occurring, and what's the likely severity or injury? And that's a piece that folks often struggle with. Okay, interested party, again, same stuff as with your environmental system, but they're different interested parties. You got OSHA, you got your employees, you got unions, and they may have different issues relative to health and safety. And that's it for definitions. Okay, so now we're going to jump into the standard itself. We're going to talk about the requirements, and then we're going to demonstrate or talk about Lear's procedures and things that you'll need to update in each section. At the conclusion of the training, we're going to review a brief implementation schedule, action items that I've developed and things that I will share with you electronically. And you guys can individually kind of put together your own implementation schedule. But that will be provided to you. So very similar to ISO 14000, the requirements of 45,001 start at section 4.0, context of the organization. Then you've got the same same sections, 5, leadership, but they've added the word worker participation. 6.0 planning, 7.0 support, 8.0 operations, 9.0 performance evaluation, and 10.0 improvement. So again, same framework as ISO 14001. And here's just an expanded with the sections and subsections. But the prior standard was called OSAS 18001, and a lot of companies were already certified to that standard. And that standard was transitioned out so that everybody that was certified to that is now needs to be certified to the 45,001 standard. And again, as part of your training materials, I didn't give you the entire standard because of copyright rules. Each site should purchase an official copy of 45,001 and have that available to look at, because there's an appendix that's got some nice information in it. There's some front end stuff that you can read if you need to, but it is good to have a full version of the standard. Okay. So let's talk about 4.0, context of the organization. This is one section that when this came out for environmental, it took me months to digest these requirements and understand what they were actually trying to say. So under your environmental system, you already have some verbiage about your context and who are the interested parties, what do they expect from us, what is the scope of our system, and what are the processes that we're going to follow. So again, what is my context? It's any external or internal issue that can affect us, and every Lear site's different. I mean, you could be up in the middle of nowhere, like my friends in Roscommon. You could be in the middle of an industrial park and have a warehouse across the street and be driving traffic all over. Each site has kind of a unique context, and it's anything that can affect your ability to meet the minimum intended outcome. So anything that can affect continual improvement, how you fulfill your legal requirements, or anything that can affect your ability to achieve your objectives, any internal issue or any external issue. So maybe you've got a company with very limited capital, and to improve your safety program, you need to spend some capital, but you can't do it because you don't have the money. That's part of your context. Maybe you have an employee base that speaks another language as their first language. That's an issue that impacts your safety program. That's part of your context. Maybe you're located next to a propane storage facility that could explode. That's part of your context. So, you know, the ISO people just want you to understand these things and consider them. Again, it's not that big a deal. You know, some of your interested parties and context would be your union, your stockholders, OSHA, the local community. Again, your reputation as an employer. And these are just examples of things that could be part of your context. Maybe you're in Iowa and the closest clinic or hospital is 40 miles away. If that's the case, you may have to enhance your on-site medical response, either equipment, maybe training, maybe having an on-site EMT or something, but that would be part of your context. And I'm not going to read all those because I gave them to you. Okay, so interested parties, again, who are they? Well, obviously your employees are interested. Your customer's interested, potentially. I know BMW is interested because they're telling suppliers to get certified. The community wants you to operate a safe and secure business. And again, it's these interested parties where we have to understand what they expect from us. And if we are required to do it, it becomes what they call a compliance obligation. But at this point, we're just trying to understand what they are. And here is, again, just some examples. Employees, your corporate office, they've got some policies that they expect you to follow. Your union, if you're a union site, your contract may have some safety elements to that, etc. And just some more examples there. Okay, so what Lear did was put together an updated interested party matrix. And again, this will be one of the templates that you'll have to fill out. Again, they've identified some common interested parties, a little bit about what they might need or expect, but this is not completed. This will be something that you guys will complete as part of your upgrade process. Okay. Determining your scope. Again, I'm not going to bore you with that, but there is a scope document here called EHS MSF 00A. You've got that for environmental. They've updated it for safety. You'll have to update that form. And as within every section, you are going to need to update the procedure. So here it says update EHS MMM 4.0, which will replace EMM 4.0. So you'll pull up the template, you'll fill in the blanks where all the green stuff is, and then you'll start using this procedure instead of EMM 4.0. And then you'll update the interested party matrix, which I believe is a new form. It was not included in the environmental program. So for this section, we've got 3 action items, pretty straightforward. We update the procedure, we update our scope document, and we complete our interested party matrix. And any questions on that? So for you EHS coordinator types, you're probably very familiar with the EMM procedures. And again, each of those are going to be replaced with the new EHS MS procedures. Okay, so this section is pretty straightforward, not much to it. The next section on leadership and worker participation. The worker participation is a new section. This is not found in the environmental section. It specifies, here's where you need to consult your employees. Here's where your employees need to participate. Under leadership, again, you're probably already here. Top management must demonstrate leadership commitment and accountability for their occupational health and safety system. I do believe your management teams are already doing that. the standard requires establishment of health and safety committees, which again, you guys consider that to be probably common because that's what you do. But there are organizations that don't have health and safety committees. It requires leadership to identify and remove any barriers to employee participation. They need to support continual improvement, and they need to provide adequate resources, people and dollars. And that's part of what they're doing here is they're providing you the resource to be trained on the new program. So again, management needs to understand your health and safety system. If you've got managers that are, whoa, that's EHS. Why are you bothering me with that? That's not acceptable. Top management, which is pretty much your site manager and their direct reports, they all need to be aware of the system, the hazards, the risk reduction projects. They need to help set objectives. They need to support health and safety committees by letting people go to the meetings. And they need to enforce the safety policies in their area. And again, we're going to go back into internal auditing and we're going to assess our managers doing that. And again, some of you may have problematic areas where maybe not a manager, but a supervisor or a certain area of the plant doesn't tend to want to follow the safety rules. The standard says you shall have a policy. There's your commitments, and Lear does have a policy. We'll talk about that in a second. Policy has to be documented, and for you guys, has to be communicated. So, you're probably already talking about it, but you need to keep talking about it. And really, when you talk about this to the production staff, keep it simple. Just, your policy is we want to prevent injuries and reduce risk. Because your actual policy has got a lot of words, but your safety policy is pretty simple. We want to prevent injuries and we want to reduce risk to all of our employees. You guys have a integrated environmental health, safety, and sustainability policy, and this does meet all the requirements. It's been audited, but when you present this to employees, there's just a lot of words there. It's incumbent on the organization to make it understandable. So your environmental policy is you want to protect the environment. Your health and safety policy is you want to prevent injuries and reduce risk. You also want to comply with your legal stuff and you want to continually improve. And if you explain it to people in very simplistic terms, it'll be easier for them to understand. Okay. We are going to define our organizational roles and responsibilities. Again, here's what the standard requires, and here's what Lear's done. In your procedure, it defines who's top management, which is basically your site manager plus his direct reports. The EHS MS champion, the system leader. Now, these 3 bullets, our dream when we did this for environmental was that the system leader would be your quality manager, and that your EHS coordinator, specialist manager, whatever your title is, would be the facility leader and the sustainability program leader. But there's only a handful of sites that have implemented it that way. Most sites, all 3 bullets are the same person. To me, disappointing because quality folks understand systems, quite well. And if they led the system piece of this, and you guys led the 90% part, which was everything else, it would work better, but that's not the way most sites have divvied it up. And then it defines this concept of an EHS MS core team. And that's where most of you guys fit in. This is a group that should meet at least quarterly. Before it was called an EMS core team. Now it's going to be an EHS core team. And this is different from your health and safety committee. The EHS core team drives the system. So once you get everything done, on a quarterly basis, you're going to come together, you're going to look at upgrades, you're going to look at how to set objectives, you're going to look at getting internal audit scheduled, and it's this core team that's going to drive the health and environmental health and safety management system. So that's what you guys are here for. But these roles and responsibilities are identified in the procedures. Any questions on that? Give me a chance to take a drink of coffee. Okay. Okay, so here's the new section. And this one is where you may need to enhance some of the things you're already doing. So the standard requires us to consult with our employees, which remember that's us seeking their opinion or perspective before making a decision. And they require employee participation in specific actions. So for consultation, we're going to consult when we establish our policy. We're going to consult when we set our objectives. We're going to consult them when we determine how we control our controls for outsourcing, procurement, and contractors, determining the need for what needs to be monitored and measured. We're going to consult with them when we plan our audit program, and we're going to consult with them about a continual improvement. Wow, right? The easiest way to demonstrate conformance to this requirement, from my perspective, is to add the term ISO 45001 update and review to your health and safety committee meetings. And then every time you have a health and safety committee meeting, you give them an update. So the next one you have, you're going to say, ISO 45000, we are seeking to implement it, and that's one of our goals this year. Here's the Lear Environmental Health, Safety, and Sustainability Policy. If you've got any comments on that, please let us know. And then you document. No comments, or it probably won't be a big thing. But introducing some of these topics into your health and safety meetings is a good way to demonstrate consultation with your employees. Another way would be during that way back when we could do plant meetings, just announcing we are implementing ISO 45001. If you guys have any thoughts on that, let us know. Write it down, document that you've done that. Those are some ways to demonstrate and document consultation. It's really unlikely that they'll have a lot of desire to change your policy or change your objectives, but you just have to be able to prove that you did consult with them and listen to their opinion. Now, consultation doesn't require us to do what they say. We give them some ideas of what we're doing. They give us some feedback. We consider it. Participation is where they get some say in the program. So where do employees need to participate? Well, in determining how they participate. That's interesting. But most of you guys, again, have a health and safety committees. You usually have some kind of an employee suggestion process where if they have ideas, they can suggest things. Many have a behavior-based or an observation program where if employees notice unsafe conditions, they can document that or report that to management. And those would all be different types of participation. They also have to be involved in identification of hazards and the assessment of risk for these hazards in their areas. And we'll talk about how you can do that. They need to participate in how to eliminate hazards. Again, that's a great way to introduce your employee suggestion process, where they can see a risk and report it and help get these things eliminated. Input into the communications process. How are things communicated? Again, we can discuss that during a health and safety committee. We can seek their opinion. We can tell them, hey, here's stuff that we post. Here's where we put our metrics. Here's how we post incident investigations, and see what they think about that. Again, they probably won't have a lot of feedback, but we just need to be able to prove that we did. And then in incident investigation, employees need to be involved in incident investigation. If it's a small injury, it's probably just the supervisor and the employee and any witnesses. If you have a bigger injury, you may pull in additional people into the investigation team. But when you do incident investigations, and I know you guys document those in your AIC program, add employee names that are involved in the investigation so that you can prove this. Because at some point when you do get certified, and I think it's going to happen, that will be documentation that your external registration company will ask for. Okay. So, Brandy, is this going to change how you run your health and safety committee meetings?
Actually, I started doing these things yesterday in kind of announcing that we were going this route with and going to prepare ourselves for ISO 45000. So it did change the way we had approached it here in the past, but it worked very well yesterday.
Okay, well, good. No, I appreciate that. And again, you've already got kind of a structure for what's required. It's just getting some of these things documented that may not currently be available, and it doesn't have to be done today. You meet every month, so you can start them off slow, talk about your policy, talk about your these were the objectives this year. Here's our control procedures. Here's the metrics where and those are things that you may already be touching on anyways. But again, just look at how these get documented in the notes. And again, I think that the easiest thing you do is put that ISO 45001 update or review as part of your standing agenda. And then every meeting just saying something about it. And I think that'll go a long ways. Again, how do we do this? Establish a robust safety committee process, which we're working on during, whether you call them safety huddles, toolbox talks, whatever your communication process is, are ways you can seek their participation and consultation. Those of you that may have safety-based observation programs, set up cross-functional incident investigation teams, especially for more serious injuries. If it's a recordable or a lost time injury, if you can make it your practice, hey, if this is a lost time injury, we're going to have EHS, the employee, the supervisor, and then we're going to pull in a few extra employees from different areas to be part of the investigation. And that's, again, that's not required for every incident, but maybe for the more serious incidents. And again, just communicate and potentially set up, every manager, supervisor should have a safety piece of their performance goals. Some very successful companies, take those safety metrics and push them down to the supervisory level and make them accountable for the implementation of safety in their areas. So that's a good way to show, again, participation. So leadership, first step is we're going to update the procedure. We're going to ensure that you guys have the most current copy of the Lear Environmental Health, Safety, and Sustainability Policy, because I've been to a few sites recently where they're using a prior copy of that. So just make sure you got the most current one. Again, develop or update your standing agenda for the Health and Safety Committee, adding the ISO 45000 update. Make sure that in your Health and Safety Committees, you're at least touching on the incident investigations that month. Update your management team monthly. Don't do this stuff in a vacuum. Every month, whatever management meeting you have, whether it's monthly, weekly, or bi-weekly, or how often you do it, give them a quick update. They need to know that this stuff does not just happen. It takes time, it takes energy, and at a minimum, they need to be aware of it, and they should hopefully be part of it. And again, just continue to communicate both the environmental and safety elements of your policy. That should just be an ongoing thing that you remind people of. Okay, any questions on what we're going to do for 5.0? Again, this is not a lot of effort here, but does require some actions. Okay, so 6.0 planning. This is what I call the big deal section of the standard. This is what is going to require you guys to do the most work, and this is where you're going to expend most of your energy. So the standard requires us to take actions to address risk and opportunities. Pretty generic, right? And it requires us to establish occupational health and safety objectives. And there's certain requirements attached to those. Okay, and there's a couple of subsections, but the overall focus of this and the environmental standard are to assess your risk and set up processes for risk reduction. Okay. So this first section, again, it wants you to look for risk from your hazards. Wants you to look at risk relative to your legal requirements and risk relative to your context and your scope. We need to have a process to identify these, which, fortunate for you guys, Lear's already kind of defined this in the procedure. But this first section, when I say general, it's just the general process for identification and management of risk. Now, this is the section here under 6.1.2, hazard identification. This is where most of your risk are going to come from, are from known and acknowledged hazards. And we're going to talk about a tool to do this. You guys have already done some hazard identification through job hazard assessments or job safety assessments. You may have some of those things documented, but we are going to roll all of that information into what I call a hazard ID and risk assessment matrix. It's similar to the process that you use for aspects, but this will be for health and safety hazards. The standard requires processes that are ongoing and proactive. So this is not anything we do one time and then we're done. The standard says to identify hazards, look at past incidents. Look at the ways people have gotten hurt. Identify those hazards. That's pretty easy. Look at our routine and non-routine activities. What are hazards associated with those? Emergency conditions. Fires, severe weather, depending on where you're at, floods, earthquakes, medical hazards, human factors. Some of us aren't that smart. I mean, we can't just say he got hurt because he wasn't that. We have to account for human factors to determine, do those generate hazards. Other issues in how we design our processes, situations that may not be controlled by us but may influence our employees. Changes as we go through a change process. How do we identify potential hazards? How work is organized, social factors, bullying. We can't be bullied anymore. Sexual harassment, stress, poorly trained supervisors cause their employees to feel overly stressed because they're not supervising. They don't have the right supervisory skills. But these are all just different types of hazards that we need to try to identify on our risk assessment tool. And again, proactive. So when we go through changes, are there new hazards? When we do a project, a construction project, that would be a non-routine activity. What are the hazards? And we have to identify those things before we start the work. Okay. So again, where do you go? If you have some job hazard assessments, let's start there. Safe work permits, again, that's an ongoing thing. Some companies require a contract to fill out a safe work permit before they start a job. They want to predict the hazards. Anytime somebody gets injured, you should look at how they got injured and did we identify that as a hazard? Because I think as you EHS folks know, people can get injured in some pretty weird ways. Management of change, again, consider hazards and change. New chemical approval process. Again, other ways that we can identify potential hazards. Who are we trying to protect? Now, the scope of a health and safety system it's a little bigger. It's any of our employees, temporary, full-time employees, people that come into our work site, the guy that fills up the Pepsi machine. If he's got to walk through the plant to get to a break room, he could be injured. Contractors, visitors, neighbors. If we could influence the safety of the people adjacent to us, we have to consider that. So I was at one site where they a big jet plant across the street was a huge warehouse where they stored stuff, and they had trucks going back and forth between the warehouse and the main plant all day long. So that truck traffic was influencing the safety of the surrounding community. And that hazard had to be identified. Okay. Then the standard says once you've identified the hazard, you need to assess the risk. And remember, this is the likelihood of it occurring. When it says frequency, that's likelihood of occurring. And what is the likely severity of the injury? And this is where we're trying to identify our higher hazard activities, medium hazard, and lower hazard activities. The standard requires us to, where am I going here? Okay, so Daryl just got in. Sorry, Daryl. Daryl, if you're here, what I might suggest that you guys do, there is another class being taught on June 16th. So if you guys just joined and you're an hour late, I'll leave it up to you. If you want to just try to jump in and get, because we're really right now getting into the meat and potatoes of some stuff here. So I would say you if you didn't, I'm just thinking, sorry guys. And I am recording this. So, Daryl, if you wanted to stay on and just participate from here forward, I could send you a recording of the first hour. You can watch that. Or the other option would be to join the class on June 15th. And that is the last of the 3 classes. So if that date doesn't work for you, go ahead. Well, actually, what you could do, Daryl, is you could stay on and participate right now and then join the first hour or so on the 15th if you want to do that. And I realize it wasn't completely clear that this was Eastern time, and I'll make sure that the next time I do that. So, Daryl, it's up to you. You can stay on and participate and capture the hour and then on the 15th, or we'll work it out. Okay. So the ISO 45000 standard says we first identify hazards, then we assess their risk. And the hope is that over time, we have some kind of a methodology that shows how we can demonstrate a risk reduction based on our activities. And we'll go through an example of that. Okay, I think I missed a slide. Here we go. And then it also has a section about identifying opportunities. So the standard says you will identify opportunities to enhance your safety performance by taking into account your planned changes or risk management, opportunities to eliminate or reduce risk, and opportunities to adapt work organization, or the work environment. So again, this is part of the process. Do we have a management of change process that considers safety? Do we have processes to reduce or eliminate risk? Employee suggestion. Again, things you probably already have in place. Okay, so what are the steps here? Again, the first step was to identify our scope and people that are affected by our activities. Next step, identify hazards, identify our existing controls, and then assess our risk. And then try to identify, are there any areas where the risks are unacceptable, or things that were areas where we may need to implement additional controls. So those would be the basic steps here. Again, so how do I make that go away? Here are the different areas we're going to look to find the hazards. And again, we're talking about physical hazards, chemical hazards, electrical, biological, radiation potentially, and psychological. Are there psychological issues involved with our employees? You know, do we struggle because we have so many temporary employees? Do we struggle to get our supervisory staff trained with the right people skills? Are there other things that could impact the psychological welfare of our employees? Again, just some more examples of types of injuries and types of occupational health or disease. You know, slips and trips and falls. We could be crushed. We could be electrocuted. We could be exposed to chemicals. We could be asphyxiated, depending on the type of business we have. When we look at risk, again, it's the likelihood that this injury were to occur, and then the potential likely consequence. It's the consequence piece where people have the hardest time scoring, because they don't know, is this the worst case where somebody dies every time, or so forth. So when you think about the likelihood of occurrence and then think about this term likely consequence. So if you've got something that is possible, it could happen, is known to happen maybe once a year. It could result in medical treatment. That scores a 9. That's considered a moderate risk. Things that might score up into the red zone would be things that we just won't do until we can control it better. And then there's this concept of risk, tolerance. How much risk is Lear willing to accept? So we have some things that are broadly accepted risk. I mean, we drive to work every day. There's a risk, but we accept that. In Michigan, we walk into work during the winter. We could slip and fall. That's a pretty, it's broadly accepted, but it kind of gets into that area of it's something we can potentially control because we can shovel, we can put salt out. You get something into that risk zone. Lockout, tag out. There's a risk.
Put it on there.
I need to get somebody to mute themselves. Let's see.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
No, that's okay. We'll try to get everybody muted. And then there's a risk of things that are intolerable. So some companies say we don't want our employees to go into confined spaces because we don't want to provide all the training we think it would take to make that safe for them. So anytime we go into a confined space, we bring in a trained external contractor because the risk of sending our employees into that confined space is not tolerable for us. And so we're trying to get everything into that risk tolerance zone through different types of controls. And that's the goal. Okay. So here is an example of a hazard ID in a risk assessment tool. And I'm not trying to test your eyesight here. We're going to open this up and look at it in some detail. This is an example of the format that was used in the Duncan, South Carolina seed assembly site. And they are already certified to the 45,000 standard through Intertech. Lear has a couple of different formats in their toolbox. The corporate guys and I had a discussion on which one to train you to, and they decided train to this one because we're already certified using it. I like it because I helped Mick put this together, and I think it makes a lot of sense. Now, if you guys look at one of the other ones that's out there, you might choose to use it, but I think this tool works pretty well. So the goal of this is it's just like your aspects process. What are the high hazard activities at our site? And we want to be able to identify those pretty clearly. And then over time, if we can reduce the risk, we want to reassess the risk to show how we've reduced the hazard. And that's what this tool is for. Okay, so how did I do this last time?
These are some things they had us print.
Okay. Let's see here. So this is probably the biggest piece of work you guys have ahead of you is to get this put together. So I'm going to escape out of this and I'm going to pull up the actual worksheet. Okay. So the worksheet it's got multiple tabs set up. The first tab is kind of the flow chart for kind of how we're doing it. Um, the criteria, for the scoring, which should help us to be somewhat consistent with scoring. Risk matrix, just kind of showing, probability or likelihood and severity, just again to kind of remind us of what the risks are. And then what they did was they set up these tabs at the bottom here. They split their plan up. They created a tab for general risk, general hazards associated with just being at the site. So instead of trying to evaluate these hazards in every area, they said, here's a bunch of things that present a risk to everybody at the site. Then they went into the office area, into their production or assembly process, maintenance, material handling, risk relative to contractor activities, and then risk relative to visitors. And at the conclusion of this training, I will send a copy of this to you guys. If you are a assembly site, a lot of these things may be relevant to you. If you're a stamping facility like our friends in Roscommon, you've got a lot more hazards than they do here. So, but again, the first step here was to split the site up into the different process areas that may have similar hazards. Okay, so then the next step was to identify the hazards. So what you'll notice here, team. So this is the risk assessment team for this area. This is how we demonstrate their participation. The department, who does it affect? The activity, again, walking into the building. Is it a routine or non-routine activity? What is the hazard? Well, the hazard here is we could slip and trip in the parking lot. Then there's a drop-down menu here for the type of hazard. So again, this has been populated just to remind you of the different hazard types. Here, they want to walk into the building still. They could be struck by traffic in the parking lot. And yeah, this is a lot of general stuff. Most of it's pretty low hazard stuff, but it's like your aspects where you had to identify pretty minor environmental impacts. Here you're having to identify pretty low risk hazards, but you want to get them all on the spreadsheet. Okay, so here we've got, we're gonna walk through the plant. We could be struck by a forklift. That makes sense to everybody. We got a smoking hut. Maybe we could be exposed to secondhand smoke. Working in poor illumination. If we had an area poorly illuminated, poor lighting, difficult seeing, that creates a bunch of hazards. Okay, so I think you're kind of getting the flavor of how this works. Looks like make this bigger for. Okay. Okay, so why do I? Okay, so in production, activity, handling bare metal, routinely, spurs, cutting and jabbing. This hog ring might make sense to some of you guys. I don't know what that is. But we've got some possible flying material, might get into our eyes.
Yeah, that's like a very large staple gun.
Okay, I knew it made sense to somebody. We could puncture our hands. It could create an ergonomic issue, etc. Okay.
As a matter of fact, that is in fact one of our ergonomic wrist problems that send employees to the clinic.
Okay. And then if we go further over here, we are going to assess our risk. You know, what's the probability? What's the severity? Um, and then we're going to say, okay, how are we going to control it? So here they put some cut resistant gloves in there. Here's the hierarchy, and we're going to talk more about the hierarchy of controls, but here they defined it. Well, their control is PPE. Is it and the standard wants you to go up the food chain here. So the first step is to try to eliminate the hazard. Second step, substitution. Third step, engineering controls. Fourth step, administrative controls. The last step is PPE. And we're going to go through some of those controls in detail in a little bit. So for those of you that are not safety folks, we're going to explain some of these things in more detail. And then again, after our controls, what is the residual risk? And again, you'll see a few yellows, which are moderates, and red stuff we wouldn't do, but then we control it, and we've got a lower risk, and that's kind of what we're showing here. And then we've got a column to identify our CFRs that apply to that hazard, and then we've got a place for notes to capture anything you want to remember later. So this is the tool. And again, we're going to talk for a second here how to set up a risk assessment team and how to get this completed for your site. And as I said earlier, this is probably the most work associated with upgrading to the 45,000 standard is getting this spreadsheet completed. Okay, so how do we do this? Okay, so first step is to set up our spreadsheet. We want to create a general site tab, which you've seen. And this is where we're going to capture risk that are relevant to almost everybody that kind of comes into our facility. And what those are. You might set up an administrative engineering admin tab. Production processes, like at their assembly, at JIT assembly, it was just one process, seat assembly. But if you were up in Roscommon where you have a stamping process, you might be doing some welding, you might have a paint line, if you did injection molding, you might set up a tab for each of those main areas. But it's up to you guys on how you split this site up. I think we want to try not to split it up into smallest sections, but then not too big as well. Like maybe you have a quality lab where they use some acid, and maybe it makes sense to call out the quality lab. So it's up to you guys how to split the site up. So again, first step here, set the spreadsheet up. The second step is to identify the hazards in each of these areas. And we need to do this with employee participation. Now, there's a few different ways to do this. I unfortunately know the realities of your lives. Oh my God. Why did you guys choose to work in the automotive business? It's crazy. But what you might consider is getting your core team or a subset of your core team to do the first draft of the hazard ID risk assessment process. Once you get it to where you think it's pretty reasonable, then you can pull in some hourly folks. You can pull in some other, supervisory staff, team leader types, and say, okay, here's the hazard identification that we put together in your area. What hazards did I miss? Here's how we scored the hazards, the risk. Tell me which ones you don't agree with. I want you to change at least one of these numbers. And then you can reflect that these people are part of your risk assessment team. But that's an easier way to, instead of trying to pull what they'd like you to do is pull like 5 people off the floor and sit in a conference room and train them on what hazards are, and then train them on how to fill the spreadsheet out. But that's not your current reality. I know that. Again, there's a drop-down menu that's there to kind of help you remember what some of the different type of hazards are. Is this a routine activity or a non-routine activity? So like in maintenance, they may do a lot of things non-routinely. But if they do it, I guess, routinely enough, you could show it as a hazard, but call it non-routinely. And then we want to identify, using the hierarchy of controls, what type of control method are we actually using? And we'll show you some more examples of that in a minute. Okay, so that's it for hazard identification and risk assessment. The next section requires us to identify our legal and other requirements, or what we call compliance obligations in our system. You saw some of them identified on your hazard ID. You do have some other ways, like your activities calendar, that will ultimately show your regulatory requirements, whether they're state or federal OSHA requirements relative to emergency responders. If you have any compliance obligations in your union agreements, and anything with your local community, and these again need to be documented. And what you're going to need to do here is update your, well, previously it was called your environmental activity calendar. Now it's an EHS activities calendar. What the corporate guys have done is taken the template and added another tab for health and safety. So currently you've got a tab for environmental activities. There'll be a secondary tab for health and safety issues. So things like lockout, tagout inspections, confined space inspections, forklift, operator physicals, eye wash station inspections. Again, all those need to be mapped out and tracked on the activities calendar. And again, there you see another column for your various CFRs. Okay. And once we identify our risk and opportunities, our hazards, our compliance obligations, we're going to plan actions to achieve the requirements in our system. And these are going to be things like work instructions, your corporate policies, training, communications, emergency response plans, etc. These are how we plan our actions to meet our requirements. Okay. Okay, any questions on planning? Okay. Objectives. Okay, the standard says you're going to establish health and safety objectives. You've already got these. And now it's just a matter of how they're documented. So again, your objectives are the overarching goals for your program. They should be measurable when they can be. They need to be monitored. And this will be something that you will review at all of your core team meetings. Where are our objectives? How are we doing?
Would this be in addition to the ISO 14,000 objectives? Is it one and the same, or a whole nother set of objectives?
Yes, it will be another set of objectives relative to safety. So you've got environmental goals, and then you're going to have health and safety goals. And again, I suspect you probably have those. How they're documented may be inconsistent, but we'll talk a little bit here about how they need to be documented. but yeah, you need to have environmental goals and you need to have safety goals. Once you set the goals or objectives, you have to have an action plan. What are we going to do? Who's responsible? What resources do I need? How often am I going to evaluate this objective to determine, am I on track? And that again will be a big part of the core team meeting. You can have higher level of strategic objectives just for injury reduction. You could have objectives to reduce a certain type of a risk. At one facility, they evaluated their assembly process. They determined all the tasks that required them to be above the shoulder, and then they implemented a process to reduce the number of tasks that were done above the shoulder, which they felt would reduce ergonomic injuries in the shoulders or backs. And then operational objectives, again, we could install a sound barrier around our compressors. We could enhance machine guarding around certain presses. That would be another type of an objective. And again, very similar to the same form that you have for environmental, same form can be used for health and safety. But again, in your manual, I believe it gives you the option to use this form or similar documentation. So if you're currently documenting your health and safety goals or objectives in a different fashion, if you have something that states the objective, defines the indicator, tells me who's in charge of the program, tells me what risk we're trying to mitigate, and then identifies an action plan with responsible parties and schedule, you don't technically have to use this form. But again, this form kind of lays it out nicely if you choose to. Okay, so planning 6.0. First step is to update the procedure. That's pretty straightforward. A second step is to set up some teams to complete the hazard ID and risk assessment using the form that we presented. You need to update your health and safety activities calendar, and then you need to document your health and safety objectives. Those are the key actions there. Okay, so let's get started here. I just pulled up on my drive. Here are all these EHS, MF, there's forms, the procedures down here, so this is all stuff that's out there on, I don't know what you call it now, if it's called the Lear One, Lear Net, everybody Lear. These documents are out there for you to download. And so much like it was for the environmental system, I believe there's a lot of blanks that are green. So again, this is 6.0 planning, which we just talked about. And this just describes, basically how you guys do stuff, environmental aspects, because this is environmental and safety, hazard identification, from a procedure perspective, updating these is pretty easy. And then when it gets to implementing them, you'll have a little legwork. Okay, so I wanted to show you that. Okay, so I'm hoping you guys were able to print out this workshop. If you weren't, and you have a blank piece of paper and a pen, you'll be able to do this. So just follow along with us here. So again, remember, we need to have all of our, not all of our employees, some employees participate in the process. We're going to identify the hazards, assess the risks, determine the controls. Again, here's just some more verbiage on types of hazards. I find that if I think about these, when I think about the types of hazard, and then I go out into like a maintenance area, it reminds me of kind of what to look for. And then our standard risk assessment, that's what we're going to try to do here. But here's an example which I'm hoping you guys can see the whole thing minus. Okay. So if we're going to do a job hazard assessment or identify the hazards associated with cooking dinner, the activity I think we're all pretty familiar with. So again, we identify the hazard of using the knife. That's kind of a routine activity. The hazard category, cutting, the likelihood, severity, and then the risk. And then the type of controls. Okay, so we do knife training and we maintain sharp knives. Cooking, we could get spattered by some grease. I don't know why that was called crushing. It should not be crushing. It should be heat or burning or something. Routinely, the risk, and we wear an apron, which is our PPE. The gas stove could explode or catch on fire. That would be a non-routine activity. Spoiled food, we could get food poisoning. Or we could drop a big can of tomato sauce on our foot. So that's just an example of an activity, and then ultimately us identifying hazards. So I've given you a blank form, and what I'd like you guys to do, either individually or with the folks you're with, identify one or two activities at your plant, the activity, the hazards associated with that activity, routine or non-routine, hazard type, risk, likelihood, severity, risk, and then what your controls are. In a second, I'm going to pull up that slide that has the hazard categories. If you don't have this printed out in front of you, just take a blank piece of paper, put a few columns, come up with the activity, the hazards, same information. I'm hoping most of you were able to print this off before today. And we're going to take probably about 15 minutes to do this. Now, for you EHS people, this might seem a little rudimentary, simple. But for those of you that are not accustomed to thinking about hazards and activities, this is a good first start for you guys. So at this point, are there any questions on what I've asked you to do? Okay, so let's see what we came up with. Because of the size of the class, I'm not going to have every team present their stuff, but I'm going to ask a few of you to kind of give us an overview of what you did. And then everybody at the conclusion of that, I'd like to hear some questions or clarifications on some examples that you did as well. So, Ed, have you got some people with you? Or are you all by yourself?
Yes, I have Izzy that joined me in my office.
Okay. So can you give me an example of what you guys thought about?
Yes. One of the areas is pulling seat frames from the bin that's at floor level. That's an activity, pulling the bins from the bin, pulling frames from the bin to put them on the line.
Okay, so that's the activity. What would be what would be the hazards?
The hazards is low back pain, shoulder strain, and possible cuts, lacerations.
Okay.
Routine or non-routine, it is a routine task that's done every day, all day.
Sure.
The hazard task is ergonomics and injury if not wearing the proper PPE.
Okay.
Risk assessment, we were torn between 2 or 3. We label it at 2 for both, for injuries and ergonomics, and severity 2 as well. And controls would be lift, assist, or platforms to put the bins on to lift it higher, where they're not bending as low to pull the frames, and making sure they're wearing proper PPE, proper gloves to eliminate the lacerations, cuts.
Okay. Great. Okay, Mike, what did you guys think? Mr. Hall?
Okay, I'm in my office, so I'll just go through one I went through.
Sure.
One of them, I had an activity of walking into the building. So the hazards, one hazard we come up against would be ice on the ground. Another one would be our curbs that we have present is a hazard.
Okay.
And a third hazard I had was just traffic.
Gotcha.
So going back to the ice on the ground, that is non-routine. Here in Missouri, we don't have a whole ton of ice, but it happens.
Okay.
The curbs, however, are fixed, so that would be, their presence would be routine,
Sure.
and traffic can be routine as well.
Okay.
Then going back to the ice on the ground, as far as the hazard type category, that would be a slip trip. Same for the curbs, it could be a slip trip. And lastly, for the traffic, that would be a crushing hazard from an automobile hitting somebody.
Okay.
Then for the risk assessment for the ice on the ground, the likelihood, I did put that as a 3. It happens. It happens every year. The curbs, same general idea that, they're always there. So that's present. I put a 2, I don't know.
Okay.
The traffic, however, the likelihood of employees, hitting a lot of traffic, not a real high traffic area, but it's present. So I put that as a 1. Maybe that's a little on the low side. Then going into the severity for the ice on the ground, I put that as a 3.
Sure.
For the severity of the curbs, same idea, a 3. However, for the traffic, that's higher. That's going to be a 4. And maybe
Right.
that's not even high enough, but it's pretty severe. So the risk for the ice on the ground, put as a 9. The curbs as a 6, and the traffic as a 4.
Okay.
So for the controls for the ice on the ground, I put eliminate, use the ice melt or salt. For the curbs, the control I put on the curbs is use high vis yellow paint for awareness. I'm not sure exactly what that would be called other than that. If that's administrative or which one you want to throw that under.
That's a good question. I'd almost consider that more of like an engineering control.
Engineering, yeah, that's right.
But yeah, but it does make sense.
And then for traffic, I put administrative way to control it would be no shift overlap to minimize, people coming in as people are leaving. You want to have some time between to allow the traffic to come and go.
Sure.
That's one option. That's one of the examples I had.
No, that's and it just followed right along, and yeah, it makes good sense to me. Brandy, how about you guys? Anything exciting that you guys talked about? Or if you're by
Well,
yourself?
it's me, and I'm fairly new, so this was fun. I talked about steaming seats as
Okay.
an activity, and the hazards themselves are obviously the steamer itself, the hose, the elevated platform, and then the overall steaming process. Most of those are routine except for the elevated platform, obviously. And then the types of injuries or the types of hazards are with the steam itself, the steamer. It's obviously we could burn ourselves. We've got an entanglement and a slip hazard, trip hazard with the hose. The elevated platform is a fall hazard potentially. And then the steaming process itself is an ergonomic hazard, has an ergonomic component to it.
Okay.
In terms of burn, I think the likelihood, it's fairly likely. So I had a 4 on that. The severity is a 3, so that gets it at a 12. Steam hose was 3, which is a 9. The elevated platform 2. The likelihood was the 2 in terms of slip or a fall, and the severity is a 4. And then the steaming process itself is probably the most risky thing in terms of hazard. So put put it at a 5 as a likelihood. And then the severity is a 4. So that's obviously the one that we'd start focusing on. So our controls were the PPE required, obviously, to prevent the burns. Terms of the hose, we have an engineering control, which is a recoil on the hose itself. Elevated platform is a design control as well. The handrails, the toe boards, things like that. And then the steaming process itself is at this point training on proper positioning and how to follow the work instruction to minimize that overexertion and the things that go along with the steaming process.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, and this is again just listening to how easily you kind of flowed through this. I mean, these are things you guys understand every day. I mean, the stuff that you see on the floor, the ways that you see people get hurt. I mean, I think you guys are going to have a pretty good appreciation for, you know, the basic activities and the hazards and what are out there. You know, will you miss a few things? Well, maybe. But you probably won't miss any real high hazard issues. So again, I think the way you kind of flowed through that was quite nicely. Now, Jeremy, I know you guys, you say you were struggling, but I don't believe you, because I think you probably did better than you thought. But just tell me about the discussions that you guys were having and kind of some examples of what you guys came up with. And Jeremy, if you're talking, you're muted.
Here's it. Speakers. Here's it. Hey, can you hear me?
We can hear you now.
Okay, good deal. Yeah, I'm going back and forth. I actually still had a question. From an auditing standpoint, shouldn't we all be using the same scoring system? Like, for example, as it relates to Duncan being certified, and if they're being audited, you know, and we're looking at this risk assessment, are our scoring system the same as Duncan's, right? So
Well, yeah, your scoring system will be the same, but again, how you choose to implement it and apply it, you know, this is a very subjective process. And as much as we're trying to be consistent, you know, it's got to be true to your site. And keep in mind the goal here. Now, this is going to bother some people because there's some black and white people out there. The answer doesn't really matter. We're trying to assess relative risk and look at all these activities and get our higher level risk to kind of float to the top. And those are going to be the things that we're going to want to try to improve and demonstrate some risk reduction. So it's much like your environmental aspects list. You know, cardboard recycling may be more significant at your site than it is for the DuPont site that's making benzene. But that doesn't matter because it's all about relative to your site. So as much as we want to be consistent, because Lear wants to have a consistent system, how it gets applied at your location is specific to your location. Does that make sense? And if it doesn't, let me know.
Yes.
So we're good.
Again,
That makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, frankly, way back in the old days, I sat in meetings with 6 people that argued about a score on an environmental aspect, whether it was a 4 or 5. And when I told them it doesn't really matter, they got mad at me because some people like there's a right answer. There's right and wrong. There's no gray. But at the end of the day, it's whatever you and your team kind of decide on. And nobody's going to come back to you and say, you know what, Jeremy, you called that a 2. It should have been a 3. Okay. That's not going to happen. So just kind of put it in perspective. So based on that, what did you come up with, Jeremy?
So for hall ringing, we chose that as one of our activities. Hazard wise, we have the hazard of staples getting into team member eyes.
Yeah.
That's a routine task. The hazard type / category. There's not really like a something categorized as flying objects. So we did other hazard,
Okay.
right? Likelihood, we did 2.
Sure.
3 as the severity. In terms of controls, we got PPE, safety glasses.
Yep.
And then as far as the risk goes, since we have 2 and 3, we were actually in, just as you asked me that question, we was trying to grade the risk. So
Okay.
if the likelihood is 2,
Yep.
and the severity is 3. Let's see. I think
Okay.
we need a little assistance finding out that risk, Jim.
Sure.
I'm curious as well, with your hog ringing, are you guys rotating at your stations or?
We are 2-hour job rotation.
Okay,
So,
that's,
job rotation would be a type of a control.
yes,
Correct. The hazard for that job rotation would be trigger finger, right? That's
Right.
the hazard wise. Routine, non-routine, we got routine as for trigger finger or trigger finger. Hazard type / category would be ergonomic. Likelihood and severity, we have 4 and 4. Ergonomic, control wise, we have we do ergonomic reviews for those stations, and we do have 2-hour job rotations.
Okay.
So
Yeah. And again, I think when you see this, I'm going to send you the example from Duncan. You'll see things on their list that, oh, that applies to us, or oh no, it doesn't. But once you guys get in the flow of this and you start to really, get in, I'll say get in the mood, it'll go fairly quickly and it'll become easier for you. So don't get overwhelmed at this point.
no, we're good.
Hey, Daryl, Mr. Gray, what did your team come up with? And Daryl, if you're talking, you're muted.
You see how he has likelihood to the left and then consequences up top? Yeah.
We're on safety grades team, if we can like speak, if that's okay.
Yeah. Oh, that's perfect.
So we chose walking into the building, walking on the shop floor, and lack of lighting.
Okay.
So the hazard for walking into the building, we put get hit by traffic, because traffic can get really crazy over here.
Yeah.
We put that as a routine. And then the hazard type, we put crushing. And then the likelihood, we put a 2. Severity, we put a 5 if it were to happen, with the risk being a 10 and the control being a 4.
Okay.
And we also chose another hazard as trip or fall,
Sure.
which is pretty routine here. The hazard type category, we put slipping, tripping, and falling. The likelihood would be a 1. We should probably up that a little bit. We're a clumsy plant.
Right.
Severity, we put 3, and the risk is 3, and the control is 4. Another activity that we chose was walking on the shop floor. The hazard for that was getting hit by a forklift or getting hit by a tugger. Both of these would be considered routine. The hazard type associated with these would be crushing, striking, cutting, and puncturing. The cutting and puncturing more so for the forklift, and then just the striking and the crushing would be for the tugger. The likelihood of both of these will be a 2, since it's very common in our plant to deal with these type of machineries.
Okay.
Severity will be 5, the risk will be 10, and then we chose 3 controls. Not really sure if that's an option, but we chose 1, 3, and 4 as our options for control.
Sure.
And then we also chose lack of lighting and trouble seeing. We put that as a non-routine. We didn't really choose it. We didn't find a hazard for it, but we did assess the risk, which was like a 1, 1, a 1 for likelihood, a 1 for severity, a 1 for risk, and then a 3 for control, which would be engineering, something that they could fix.
Okay. Awesome. No, it's really good. Um, I'm sorry, I was multitasking in my mind. What you guys will find, again, you're going to get together. You'll have some people. Everyone's going to have an opinion. Don't get too wrapped up into the details. Just, if somebody wants it to be a 2 or a 3, make a decision, be decisive, and move on. Because if you argue about every score or discuss every score, then you'll be doing this forever. You'll be surprised when what I call throw the mud against the wall here. We just throw it all against the wall. We evaluate it. And then when we do the scoring stuff, the stuff that we kind of expect to rise to the top usually does. And again, I've done this with a number of sites, and it, they think it's confusing. They don't follow it completely. But when we get to the very end and we say, okay, here are some things with some moderate risk, some lower risk, some non-risk, and the answers tend to make sense. The other thing is, this isn't what they say ongoing and proactive. So immediately after an incident, somebody gets hurt, a near miss report, a first aid injury. The first thing you want to do in your core team meetings is to check the risk assessment to see, was that hazard identified? And like I said earlier, Johnny can get injured in some very strange ways. And we maybe didn't anticipate what Johnny would do. And so when he gets hurt and we look at the incident investigation, we go back to the risk assessment. We want to make sure the hazard was identified. And that's the ongoing and proactive piece. Okay, and last but definitely not least, Sue in Plymouth. What did you guys think?
Okay, I actually pulled up a couple that we are working on currently on our annual risk assessment.
Cheater.
The biggest one that we have here is when we are changing our batteries. The hazard could be acid exposure. This is a routine activity. Hazard type category is chemical. And I have the likelihood 1 or 2, and I'll explain at the end here why I put it so low.
Okay.
Severity could be a 5. And I did my risk identification a little bit different. I had 3 different ones: environmental hazard, if you do have an acid spill, chemical exposure, and the high temperatures. We have in place full PPE is a must. It's required, which is the apron, gloves, safety glasses, as well as a face shield.
Okay.
And then they also have annual refresher training, and then all new hires do go through the process of how to change a battery and do it safely. And then we have regular battery maintenance, and making sure that there is enough water, and if there's anything wrong with them at that time, that battery would be pulled off to the side and an outside service would come in and take care of it.
Okay.
The other one I did was banding for our shipments. Excuse me. Potential for cuts on hands. The banding could fly up and hit a person in the mouth or the eyes. Pinch fingers with the crimper that they use. Again, this is a routine activity for shipping. Hazard would be potential to a cut hands or eye injury. Likelihood, again, because of the controls that we have in place, I have that at a 1. The severity could be a 3 if an employee did not follow the rules on the PPE. And the risk would be cutting and stabbing or striking. The PPE in place for that is safety glasses and gloves. And then they also have training as a new hire on the expectations for doing banding, and then the annual retraining of that, as well as our assessments on both of these activities annually.
Okay. Wow. Now, Sue, what is this form called that you're filling out?
Oh, I just put it away. Hold on. It is called, it's a critical, I have two. I have a critical task analysis determination sheet, and then I have the one that I use out on the floor for, it's the actual worksheet, task analysis worksheet. An example on my master mechanic, we have like cutting, welding, milling, the potential hazard, and then the recommendation for controls. It goes through all the machines that they could use, including driving a fork truck, the scissor lift, yard switcher, battery maintenance, fire pump test, run electrical, computer, and phone lines. We've been using this for, well, ever since I've been in this facility.
Okay.
For a very long time. And then we have the determination sheet, excuse me, which is similar to what you've got here. Yeah, I'm pretty much looking at the same thing. That's
Okay.
exactly what I've got.
And Sue, if you wouldn't mind sharing a copy of that with me, I would appreciate it.
Okay.
I'm just
Oh, you
trying
want
to-
the critical task analysis and the task
Yeah.
analysis worksheet?
Yep.
Okay,
I'm just
I will
trying
do
to,
that for you.
I'm just trying to collect some of these best practices that I see Lear folks doing. So,
Sure. Like I said, I've been here at this facility since '02, and this is something that when I took over health and safety, that it was already in place and it works.
well, and that's what we're looking for. Good examples of things that work.
Okay, I will email this to you.
Okay. Thank you.
Uh-huh.
Okay. Any other questions or thoughts from anybody else that has a question at this point? Okay. Okay. Well, I hope this is getting you started. You know, I could talk about hazard identification and risk assessment for 3 or 4 hours, but we don't have that kind of time. But again, I think we've explained the tool, the kind of the concept of breaking the plant down into sections, identifying the activities in each area, how to map that to the applicable hazards, and then how to at least start the risk assessment process. If you guys have questions as you get going, you can always email me and I'll do the best I can to help you guys out. So. And again, this usually takes a fair amount of the time during this training, and that's because it's really the most important part of what you're being asked to do. Okay. So as far as ISO 45000 goes, we understand our context, who the interested parties are, our scope. Management's demonstrating leadership. We've got a defined policy. We've allocated roles and responsibilities. We have this process for the identification of risk and opportunities, a process to identify hazards and assess risk, identify our compliance obligations primarily to the OSHA rules. And then we have these planned actions, the work instructions, the training, the communication, everything we do to try to meet these requirements. So that's kind of where we are. The next section of the standard talks about support. We need to have adequate resources. People need to be competent. People need to be aware of certain topics. And this is a little bit more specific than our environmental awareness. So there will be your challenges to build up more awareness of our safety program. Communications, again, we want a proactive process for communicating to people. And there's certain specific things we need to communicate to them. And obviously we need to control our documents. That's what we've been doing forever. Again, resources, we need to have adequate resources. And I know everyone on this call will say, we don't have adequate resources. And I don't have an answer for you there. Once you guys pursue certification and it becomes apparent that there aren't enough resources to manage the system or do certain things, that those could become nonconformities. When we do our internal audits, our internal auditors are going to be asked to assess resources. And does it appear that there's a lack of adequate resources? But when they talk about resources, it's people, and it's just easy. Just go out and hire 3 more people, right? That's a joke. The other way to have more resource applied to a system is to divvy it up and give more people responsibility. And that's what part of the core team is to share the wealth a little bit. We may need, infrastructure, forklift pedestrian separation, guarding, then we may need additional financial resources. And if we don't feel like we have adequate resources, that could become an issue. Competency, again, this just goes back to basically your training program. You've already got your training programs implemented. About the only thing you'll need to do is add this OSHA training to the activities calendar. So, your forklift training, lockout, tagout awareness, lockout, tagout authorized, periodic lockout, tagout inspections. However, all that training is done, you'll have to add that to your activities calendar. And again, they've added a tab and given you some examples here, but this will be specific to your facility. So please keep that in mind, that these templates are there for you to use. But when I did the environmental templates and I started to go out and do internal audits at companies, at sites for you guys, I noticed that they didn't change the verbiage in the template, and it didn't apply to them. But remember, these are templates, and you need to add your information. So add all your training to the EHS activities calendar. Awareness, again, what does everybody have to be aware of? Again, that we have a policy that hasn't changed. How they contribute to safety, the implications and potential consequences of not following the safety rules. And here's a new one: the results of incidents and the outcomes of the investigations. So a lot of companies will, if they have an incident, especially if it's a recordable, they might do things like a safety alert, post it, whatever. At a minimum, you'd want these things to be at least discussed, maybe during a shift handoff meeting, or just to look at how, when you have an incident, how it does get communicated, and after the investigation, how that might get communicated as well. Obviously, people need to be aware of the hazards associated with their job, and a lot of that you'll communicate through your PPE program and your work rules. And then employees must be aware that they can take themselves out of any situation where they don't feel safe. And that'll be a big auditing point during any external audit. Hey, if you don't feel safe doing this, what do you do? Well, they should say, I stop working and I report it to my supervisor. And that needs to be very clear to employees, that they're never expected to work in unsafe conditions. So that's why I say that the awareness piece it's a bit enhanced relative to the environmental piece. Communications, again, we must communicate, just like every marriage counselor tells us, right? It's all about the communication. And it's really true with any management system. I don't want to have a pure environmental meeting or a pure safety meeting, but I want to add these topics to the way that we communicate at the plant. We can post some information, and that'll get about 30% awareness. If we talk about it, we'll get another, maybe 65%, and then 5% of these our staff may not ever get it. But we've got to match our communication process with the way people learn. Some people are visual learners, some people are auditory learners, and we have to be able to demonstrate that we've effectively communicated this information to employees. Again, a lot of people start off every meeting with a safety topic, best practice. Every shift kickoff meeting, safety topic. That's the best practice. Again, just keeping people constantly thinking about and aware of safety is important. You guys have what's called an annual communications plan for environmental. It's been updated to include safety, and you need to add your safety communication to the annual plan. Excuse me. Let me get a drink of water. And this should be a form you've already got. And then I think they updated it to include the word safety. So you should also be maintaining an external communications log. This will now need to include communications that you may have relative to safety, whether it's to a health provider, a local emergency responder, a customer asking if you're certified. Those types of things would be added to your external communications log. So the big thing here is just to make people aware that we are tracking these external communications, and then other managers that may get an external communications, like a facilities manager may be contacted by the local fire department. Obviously, the EHS manager could be contacted by a healthcare provider. Just making sure everybody knows that we kind of log these things as appropriate. Documentation, again, the Lear program, you're going to have the EHS corporate manual that defines the corporate requirements, the EHS MM manual that covers the plant level information. You've got global work instructions, global forms. You've got your plant level procedures and your plant level forms. And this is all very well defined in your program. Not much to talk about there. The biggest thing here is going to be to update this master document list to not only include environmental documents, but all of your local plant level safety documents, work instructions, and forms. Those all need to be controlled and identified on your master document list. Okay, so section 7, first thing we're going to do is update the procedure. Shouldn't be too difficult. We're going to add our training plan or training requirements to our activities calendar. We're going to update our communications plan to identify how we communicate safety information. We'll update our external communications log to make sure we're capturing external communications relative to our safety program. And then we're going to update our master document list to include all of our local health and safety, again, work instructions, HAZCOM plans, safety inspection forms. All of those will have to be included as part of your control document system. Any questions on any of those activities? Okay. So operational controls, how do we control our hazards? How do we demonstrate risk reduction? There's a number of elements here, and we'll talk about those. And then the next section on emergency response, again, all of those are things you already have in place. What do we do for fires, spills, medical emergencies, severe weather, etc. So here's the words from the standard. We're basically going to control our risk. That's what the standard requires us to do. So this includes operational procedures, trainings, inspections, purchasing controls. We'll talk about some things we have to control when we purchase things, visual aids, signage, manuals, PPE assessments. Those are all the different ways that we're controlling things. Job rotation, somebody brought up. That's a form of a control for definitely for ergonomics. So the standard says we're going to control things. So when we determine the need for controls, first place to look is our hazard identification and risk assessment. Look at our compliance obligations. OSHA training, we control that through our activities calendar. And then the next buzzword that you'll become more familiar with is this hierarchy of controls. So you safety professionals, this is familiar to you. Other folks that don't think about safety all the time, it's a methodology of looking at how to control something and trying to get you to implement the most effective control. So with any hazard, obviously the best thing to do is eliminate the hazard. Substitution, and this is a really good one relative to chemicals. Maybe you're using some trimethyl death, and you can substitute it with Joe's Green solution. So that's taking another hazard and then substituting it for a lower hazard chemical. That would be considered substitution. And engineering control is some guarding or other physical thing that we do to isolate people from the hazard. Administrative controls being controls relative to defining the work process to minimize the hazard, training, any other thing administratively we do. And the very last line of defense against any hazard is PPE. So I went to a foundry and I was doing a safety management system assessment. And as part of them pouring the molten metal into a mold, they had to have a person out there with a long rod with a sample ladle at the end of it. And he had to reach up and take a sample of that molten metal. And sparks were a-flying. I mean, they're flying everywhere. And I'm looking at this, I'm going, geez, this doesn't seem very safe. And the guy says, well, obviously he had fire resistant clothes on. He had a hard hat. He had safety goggles, a face shield. I mean, he was protected. He looked like the Michelin Man. But they were relying 100% on PPE to control the hazard. And while that may be acceptable or legal, it sure looked like it could have been better. So management systems want to challenge you to, push up that hierarchy of controls. So again, here's some examples of engineering controls. An ergonomically designed chair, redesigned tools, retractable knives, using chemicals under an exhaust hood, mechanical guarding, ventilation. Those are all going to be considered engineering controls. Administrative controls, again, anything designed to get the employee to do the process in a way to minimize the risk. So the additional breaks, providing water when it's hot, job rotations, defining the safety process, training, all of these would be considered a form of an administrative control. And then the last line of defense, obviously, is the PPE. And again, listening to you guys, it really sounds like you've got very good and well-defined PPE assessments. You've got PPE programs. Again, all we have to do is get this added to our risk assessment, and we'll be in good shape. Any questions on operational controls. Okay, so this is another what I call bigger deal section to the standard. As you guys are doing business and you're changing things, we need to consider hazards in our occupational health and safety system during changes. Now, you probably have some pretty good things for like new equipment startup. That would be a management of change process. New chemical review form. That's a management of change process. Your engineering. Maybe you do a capital request form for requesting capital for a project. That could be a management of change process. So the question is, during all of these processes that we have of managing change, how do we consider our occupational health and safety system, and how do we potentially identify new hazards? So the challenge for you guys is to take a look at all the different ways you guys manage change. Management review meetings, operational review meetings, engineering change notices, all of these different things we do to change. How do we document that we've considered potential hazards and impacts to our safety program? And I believe there are some areas where you do this very well, and I believe there are probably other areas where it's probably non-existent. So in the procedure, it lists a bunch of different things you do. Your challenge is to see, how do we document our health and safety review during the changes? So here's some examples: capital approval request, design review, engineering change, contractor pre-startup. If you're going to do an addition to your facility, probably going to do a pre-startup meeting with your contractor. New equipment startup, new equipment approval or chemical approval, your operational meetings. So we're going to want to discipline our people when they do these things to make some kind of notations or documents about potential safety hazards. You guys typically aren't design responsible for your product, but your engineering groups do implement process changes, process designs. You got a paint line, you put a new one in, you design the process. The time to think about safety is in the design process, when we design a new process. So keep that in mind. Purchasing, they put some language in the standard about when we purchase things, we want to make sure that they conform to our occupational health and safety requirements. The real simple stuff is obviously when we get chemicals, we get SDS sheets and data. When we buy PPE or safety equipment, we specify the ANSI or whatever specifications, and we validate that we get the right equipment. We don't go to Joe's safety equipment because they're cheaper, and he's got really cheap safety glasses, but they're not ANSI certified. Again, the big deal here is contractors. And again, you probably already have a good process to bring contractors in, give them an orientation to your safety rules, and get them to agree to follow them. The question is, how well is that documented? And this is one of these areas where, again, Lear as a company has a lot of risk. If a contractor comes into our site, he gets injured, and we cannot prove to his and our attorney that we communicated our safety rules to him, that makes his attorney happy and our attorney sad. So contractor safety really is a high dollar risk to the company. So just take a look at how you do this and make sure that you got a good program in place. I suspect most of you do.
We actually had a incident with a contractor in the building that was hit by a forklift driver.
Oh, no.
And he ended up with like 3 or 4 surgeries in his foot because of that. And they were drilling us on this contractor safety program. So
Okay.
it was a big ordeal.
So, you know, when I do safety audits, I try to do my Clint Eastwood impression and I ask people, are you good or are you lucky? And that's really, you know, true, because a lot of you guys out there may not have had this happen, but that's because you've been lucky.
Right.
Ed wasn't so lucky.
Well, he tried to sue the company, but
Yeah, so yeah, having a way to prove that we explained to this contractor our safety rules and what to do is a big deal to the company. Okay, emergency response, again, I don't expect there's going to be any need for adjustments here. You probably already have an emergency action plan. It covers all the potential safety issues. Maybe it's medical, fire, weather, working at heights, rescue. And that's an interesting one. You know, if you've got somebody working at heights and they fall, now you've got somebody 10 feet in the air dangling. How do we rescue him? Confined space entry rescues, probably something you don't do. But any other potential safety emergency, just need to have a plan and procedure for it and implement it. Maintain your emergency response equipment, your first aids, your AED. All of this stuff is things you're already doing. But again, what you're going to want to do is add those things to your activities calendar. So if you're doing a weekly eye wash inspection, monthly AED inspections, first aid inspections, add those things to your activities calendar, and then take a look at you know, how often you're doing certain types of drills, whether it's a fire drill, severe weather drill, those types of things, because those are required and are required to be documented as well. So there shouldn't be a bunch of stuff there. So section 8.0, we're going to start off by updating our procedure. Look at the various controls we have and add those, make sure they get added to our risk assessment matrix. Review the processes that you have to manage change. And then ask the question, how does this document that we looked at our health and safety system, and does it result in any new hazards? And then add your health and safety drills to your activities calendar as well. Okay, performance assessment. The standard requires us to monitor, measure, and analyze our safety performance. And I'm sure you're probably already doing that. Internal auditing, this is going to be something new. You're already doing internal audits for your environmental management system, but now you need to add your safety management system to the auditing process. And then again, I'm going to already assume you're doing management review of the information. We just need to maybe document it a little more clearly. So again, I don't want to bore you with the words from the standard, but there are some key things here. You know, how do we monitor and measure our performance? You know, leading indicators, lagging indicators. How do we assess the effectiveness of our controls? That might be through some type of an inspection process. And then what are the criteria we're comparing it to determine, are we meeting our expectations? And how does this get communicated to employees? So again, the lagging indicators we're all familiar with are injury and injury rates, severity, OSHA recordables, lost time, you know, comp cost. Those are all different. You know, what happens after somebody's hurt. Leading indicators can be things like percent safety training completed on time, ergonomic hazards mitigated, safety observations made, or the completion of safety audits or safety inspections. Those could be considered as a leading indicator, trying to prevent the injury from even occurring. And then these things need to be added to the monitoring and measurement matrix that's already there for environmental, but we need to add our safety monitoring and measurement to that matrix. And again, at this point, maybe you're focused mostly on lagging indicators, but as part of your continual improvement process, continue to look for opportunities to define, measure, and manage more leading indicators. Especially if you're at a site where, thank goodness, you got low numbers, you got low recordables. You're not doing a lot of first aid. The more leading indicators you can monitor and measure, the easier it is to find opportunities to improve your system. Because again, that's one of your objectives is continual improvement. The other thing about performance is we must communicate it to our employees. So this is an example of a tool some sites will use. They'll post the safety triangle, and they'll post their results: lost time injuries, number of recordables, first aid injuries, near misses, unsafe observations. And again, take a look at how you present your performance information to your employees, because that is a requirement of the ISO 45001 standard. Equipment calibration, again, if you have air monitoring equipment, sound meters, light meters, air sampling, oxygen detectors, how does that equipment either get calibrated or verified? You should add those things to your activities calendar and or your preventative maintenance system to make sure that they are done on schedule, and then maintain records of calibration. And there's a little bit more stuff that could fall in here than you do have under environmental. You probably don't have much, maybe a scale. Maybe you've got gas detectors that you use for confined spaces. Those meters need to be calibrated and verified. And those things should be added to your activities calendar as well. Evaluation of compliance. Again, this is something you're already doing. Somebody needs to periodically look at your site for conformance to your OSHA program and any other requirements. I do believe that I don't know, on an annual basis, you get visited by your friends Matt and Doug. They may assign, I believe they have a consultant that may come out to your site every 3 years, and their sole purpose is to evaluate compliance to regulations. Internal audit, again, here's some of the words from the standards, same stuff with environmental. Auditors need to be objective. So if you're responsible for an action, you can't audit it. You need to set up an audit program. You don't need to audit everything every year. So especially when it comes to some of your controls, like auditing forklift safety, auditing lockout, tagout, the controls, auditing HAZCOM. Maybe you set up an audit plan for 3 years, and some of your system stuff you audit every year, and then you sample the other controls across a 3-year schedule. That's a pretty common practice. The goal of the internal audit is to verify that your system is being implemented. It's not to audit you to the ISO 45001 standard. Now, I said primary. So We want your auditors auditing your procedures and processes. And then it says, and the requirements of the standard. And the reason I say it this way is because I get to so many sites where they've got this ISO 45001 checklist, they check a bunch of things, and they think that they've done a system audit, but they haven't really went out on the floor and verified that their procedures are being followed. So again, the goal of the internal audit is to verify that we are doing what we say we do in our health and safety system. So keep that in mind. And when we get to the implementation piece here in a few minutes, I'm going to talk about some things relative to, how and where to integrate your internal audits with 14,000. Management review, it's really the same stuff. I don't know how you're currently doing management reviews of safety, but again, under the 45,000 standard, there's certain things that must be discussed with management. I still think it's a good idea to do a full system review once a year. So, end of January, 1st of February, it makes sense to me to look at the prior year. I know that you guys also do monthly updates and core team meetings and all those types of things throughout the year, but the standard says you must discuss these things. So any changes, the performance of the system, adequacy of resources. If we're having a resource issue with enough people and enough time, those should be discussed with management, and then they need to make adjustments or changes based on, again, what they can. Relevant communications, that's why we have the external log. More opportunities for improvement, that'll be what you present to them. And then the output, they'll decide, yep, that makes sense, let's do it. Nope, we got to put in a capital request. And those are the actions that we need to see management taking. Outputs, again, these are the things you're going to note. Is our system effective? What are the decisions for continual improvement? Do we need more resources, etc.? So this may be a little more formal than you're doing today, but maybe not. So for section 9.0 performance evaluation, we need to, again, first update our procedure. We need to add our safety requirements to the monitoring and measurement matrix. We need to train some ISO 45001 auditors. Develop an audit schedule. You'll need to complete your internal audit. Again, a note here to integrate this into the 14,000 process. Review the new management review template and how to integrate safety into that. And then obviously complete a formal management review. Now, those of you that may have questions right now on internal auditing, please hold those for a second. We're going to talk about that in detail. At this point, I believe Lear's goal is to have this implemented fully by the end of this year. And they are defining fully implemented as, updating the documents, completing a full internal audit of the system, and completing a full management review. And then at that point, you would be considered compliant to the standard. And then as sites need to get certified based on customer requirements, that would be a path that they'll go, I think, plant by plant. And then as a number of plants need to be certified, they may go to this group certificate scheme at some point, but that's down the road further. So don't worry about that. So I'm sure you've got some questions on internal audits. Hold those for 5 minutes. Okay, last section of the standard is improvement. We shall improve. 10.1 says we're going to identify areas of improvement and define plans to implement those. And 10.3 says we're going to work to enhance our performance. That's the goal. And then 10.2 talks about incident investigation, nonconformities, and corrective action. And we'll see about that. So again, improvement, you'll identify opportunities for improvement, which I know you do, and you'll implement actions to achieve those. Under continual improvement, you're going to work to enhance your performance. You're going to have activities to promote a safety culture. You're going to actively promote participation and consultation, and you are going to proactively communicate. Nothing new there. Under the ISO standard, they put incident investigation and nonconformity and corrective action in the same section. Now at Lear, you have the IAC system that you log and capture your incident investigation. And if you fill out all of the pieces and parts completely, it meets the requirements of corrective action. Now you have another process for what I'll call systemic or audit findings or nonconformities you identify to your system, and you may call that a CAR, system corrective and action report, CAPA, more of a quality related process. And again, that's designed to meet the corrective action requirements. And typically, you would use that for more audit findings. So an incident, injury, near miss, spill, those might be identified and investigated in IAC. Other audit findings may be managed through your corrective action or CAR process. The standard says when you have an incident or a nonconformity, you immediately try to fix the problem. You then investigate the problem and determine, are there any additional things that need to be done, or are there any systemic root causes that may need to be adjusted? You need to review your existing risk assessments to determine, would this change impact your risk? Determine the actions or corrective actions, and they want you to consider the hierarchy of controls. So when you're thinking about how to fix something, can we eliminate it, substitute it, engineer it, administratively control it, or PPE adjustments? And then review the effectiveness after you take the action. So from a systemic process here, you probably have these in place. Now, as I audit facilities, the biggest problem with incident investigation is people don't either complete the process or they don't document it completely. So they get into IAC and they just type a few fields and then they're out of there. To meet the requirement of ISO 45001, everything needs to be filled out. Not a lot of detail, but in some detail. Also, we need to document who are the employees involved with the investigation. Now, there may not be a really good field for that, or there may be. Maybe there's a field that says investigation by, and you put a name. Well, if there's a notes field somewhere, add the other names of other people that were involved in the incident investigation. And again, at the point where you become certified and your friends at Intertech come in, that's the evidence that they're going to be looking for. Okay. Again, incident investigation. First step, report the incident, collect the facts and just the facts. The investigation is where we look for systemic issues that need to be adjusted. Corrective action would be actions to mitigate the root cause. And then the last step is we must communicate the results. And that's new. That's not there for quality, that's not there for environmental, but for safety, these results need to be somehow communicated. And that's why it's important to do things like talk about these in your safety committee meetings. Post the safety alert. Talk about them during your shift handoff meetings. Be able to prove that we communicate the results of the investigation. And again, there's a lot of different things that get put into corrective action. There's the incident investigation, your system audits, a risk assessment. Maybe you're doing a risk assessment and you find there are issues that need to be corrected. Maybe you're looking at trends in your injury rates, and that pushes you into something that needs to be corrected. Or again, any other indicators of additional risk. And when you do your root cause analysis, look for systemic issues. A lot of people do these behavior-based incident observation things, and then they categorize as usually a human error, a mechanical failure, and this helps you guys drive improvements in your overall health and safety system. So for 10.0, again, first step, update the procedure. Look at the documentation of your health and safety objectives to see that we're tracking and capturing our continuous improvement projects. Use the CAR system for systemic nonconformances and AIC for incident investigation, but make sure that both of them are being filled out and completed fully. And that's a real note to anybody doing an internal audit. Pull up those investigations and make sure the data is being captured. Whew. Are we done yet? I'm working up a sweat.
A lot of information.
A lot of information. Okay, so that's the standard. That's Lear's system. Those are the things you're going to have to do to implement this program. If I've convinced you of anything, I hope I'm convincing you that in a lot of areas, this is going to be very easy. It's stuff you're already doing. The procedures to update, you're just filling in the blanks. And that part of the puzzle is going to be pretty simple. There are a few things here like the hazard ID and risk assessment, updating the activities calendar, updating the monitoring and measurement matrix. I mean, some of those things are going to take a little time, and hopefully, if I can convince you, EHS coordinator, manager, specialist people, resist the temptation to do this all yourself. Take each one of these procedures, 4.0, 5.0, 6.0, give them to somebody on the core team and ask them to update them. Just trust me, that's important, because it looks like it's just so easy. Well, I can just quickly do it. But the more you get the rest of this core team involved with this, even though it may only take them a half hour to update the procedure, it'll be a big help to you to get their take on some of this stuff. So let's just talk briefly about what are the next steps here. Okay, so again, any management system implementation, we got to have a plan. How long should it take? What resources do we need? The big deal section here is the hazard analysis and risk assessment. So put your core team together and say, okay, here's the example we saw from Duncan. Here's the spreadsheet. How do we want to attack this? And get everybody on board, and then divvy it out to different areas. The documentation, again, hand it out, get some help, get them updated. Take a look at your safety committee process, update your standing agenda, start to talk about ISO 45001 and get those discussions started. Most of this, I think you can get done. I don't think it should take you longer than 3 months. Once you get everything documented, then it's time to start implementing our internal audit program. How are we going to do the audits? What training do we need? What auditors do we have? That kind of stuff. And then the last part of this is collecting everything together and doing a formal management review. And again, I don't know how headquarters has communicated this goal to you guys. And I may have said things that are wrong. So please touch base with your corporate folks to make sure that you're aligned with what their expectation is. What I've heard is that they want to have this implemented before the end of the year. I've also heard that to declare yourself compliant, they want you to have a full audit, internal audit done, and a management review completed. And at that point, you can be deemed ISO 45001 compliant. But again, double check that with your corporate guys. I don't know for sure. That's just what they told me. Is that what they told you, Brandy? Did they tell you anything different?
No, from what Matt told me, that's pretty close to the goal. They want us all to be
Okay.
certification ready by the end of the year.
Okay. So that was the way it was explained to me. I think that's what's been explained to you, but please double check that with those guys. Again, here is a wonderfully constructed, low-tech, Excel-based implementation plan. I've tried to think about in my head, what are the action items? We're completing one today. We're getting the core team trained. Boom, 100%. I love it. Putting together a schedule. Again, I'm going to send this to you. If you choose to use it, fine. If you choose not to, maybe you're only going to use the action items and add it to however you do it. But a couple of things to note here. Your core team meetings, monthly might not be enough for the first 3 months. You guys might want to get together every 2 weeks to get this stuff pushed and done. It'd be nice to have all of this stuff pretty well wrapped up, I think, by the end of September-ish. And then that's where you can start to look at your internal audits. And even if that gets pushed into September, October, you're probably in pretty good shape. Every month, you EHS coordinator types give management updates. So they know you're working on this stuff. It doesn't just happen. So again, this is something I will send out. This and the hazard ID example from Duncan. I'm going to send this to all you guys so you'll have that. Internal audits. So developing a pool of internal audits, I think it only makes sense to audit 14,000 and 45,000 together. So set up one training schedule or one audit schedule. Here's how we're going to do this. As far as auditor qualifications, okay. So to be deemed a competent auditor in any standard, you should have some training in the standard. You should have some training relative to your own system. You should have auditor training, whether it's quality auditor training, environmental auditor training, whatever. How to plan an audit, how to document an audit. I mean, training along those lines. And so let's just say I took this training. Well, arguably, you've got some training in the standard, I would say. If you've had prior training, IATF auditor training or ISO 14000 auditor training, that's given you the competency in how to set up an audit plan, how to execute an audit, document review, how to document your audit, and how to generate findings. So that's training you've already had. And so I think if you collect all those things together, you could say, well, I'm a qualified ISO 45001 internal auditor. So consider that. But just remember, if I'm the EHS coordinator, I really can't audit much because most of this is stuff I can't say that I'm objective of. The other piece of the puzzle here is if I take a gaggle of people, not that I'm calling you guys gooses, but if I take 2, 3, 4 people together and you guys audit as a team, typically collectively, even though each of you may feel confused, maybe you don't know exactly what you're doing, but together, collectively, we can probably do an okay audit. So if you've got inexperienced people, team them up. And then I believe later in this year, probably toward the September-ish, we are going to offer some training on how to do an integrated 14,000 and 45,000 audit. So those of you that are in charge of setting up the program may want to go through that type of training, just so you get kind of a flavor for how to integrate these things together. So is there any questions on auditor training, auditor qualifications, auditor thinking? Again, we'll look at how to set up an audit schedule. You can do that on an annual basis, a 2 or 3 year cycle. And then you want to take a look at your auditing tools. Do we have an audit plan template? If you've been in my ISO 14,000 training, you know how important an audit plan is. Do you have a checklist that drives us to audit our procedures? And then do you have some kind of an audit summary template? So again, developing those auditing tools is important. Okay. And again, it just makes more sense to fully integrate the 14,000 and the 45,000 audits.
Well, and because my Nevada plant is so close to being audited for ISO 14,001, I mean, would it be smart to wait till after that to start working on this, or what do you?
Come on, Ed, quit whining about having too much work.
You see what I'm getting at, huh?
Well, and actually, you bring up a good point. So, yeah, my recommendation to you, Ed, is wait. Or actually, you could even, if you ever had a spare moment, you could start working on this. But what you're going to present, maybe you have a hobby, maybe you like to do it on the week. I don't know, but what you're going to present to Intertech during your audit is going to be your current system.
Right.
If you had the ability to start this, sure, I would start it, but I wouldn't really
show them any of that.
No, I wouldn't show them any of it. And frankly, given as much work as you need to do to get ready, you're not going to have time probably.
No.
Now the other thing that this brings up is, let's say next year you're audited by Intertech because it's part of the environmental system, and they start pulling up these EHS procedures, and they start asking you questions. Well, what about this? And you say, no, that's safety. Stick to your lane. Even though the procedures say environmental and safety, the Intertech people should only be auditing environmental. And I don't perceive that as being a major problem, but just remember that with an integrated system, you're still going to have separate registration audits. You're going to have an environmental audit and you're going to have a safety audit from Intertech if you're certified. But again, just tell your environmental auditor to stay in his lane. This is an integrated procedure, but you're only auditing environmental, so ignore the safety stuff. So don't pay attention to my activities calendar for health and safety. That's not part of your scope. And again, the other thing here, layered process audits, that's a quality type of an audit. A lot of places already add safety stuff to some of those audits. And again, I encourage people to do that. You know, when they do their quality audits, they can note any containers not labeled, any slip trip hazards. You know, some places do that, some places don't. Just a suggestion. And again, keys to success. We got to have management support. They've supported you by providing this training. They're going to hopefully support you by giving you time to meet together as core team members. We need to have a good plan done. That's why I'm giving you the example implementation plan. You need to set up a budget of internal time, potentially external cost, and get their buy-in of involvement from everybody. So those would be what I would call keys to success. Can this guy spell? Holy smokes. Fire him. That's not, additional is not spelled right, is it? No, it's not. Okay, I digress. So again, with this training and you guys out there, we have a lot of different levels of skill sets. Participation. We've got some sites with 5 or 6 people here, some sites with 1 or 2. There may be help that you guys need. And when Doug asked me to look at this stuff earlier in the year, I came up with a couple of ideas, but I don't know that they're the best ideas. And we'll talk about those. But as you're going through the process, if you're a site that might need help with their hazard ID and risk assessment, that's something that we can work with your core team and get done. Some of you guys, you're just going to hit the floor running. You got your templates. You don't need any more help. You may need help getting the internal audit process set up. There's a number of locations that I go out and physically do their internal audits, whether it's an integrated 1445 or just 14. So some sites say, it's tough to manage a pool of auditors because we're too busy. So as you're going through this process, just think about different ways you might need help, and please reach out and consider asking me for help. Now, the other thing is, if you have questions, we're not done today. I'm not going to cut the strings and say you're on your own. If anything doesn't make sense to you, feel free to send me an email. Or if there was any form or anything that I showed you on the PowerPoint, you said, I'd love to have a copy of that safety triangle, or I'd love to have a copy of that. Don't hesitate to ask, and I'll share what I can. So originally we were going to offer a full 2-hour training on hazard ID and risk assessment. I don't know, you guys are going to need that. I'm probably going to post a class. Anybody who's interested can sign up for it. I'll probably change the pricing so it's a per person price instead of a per plant price. But I'm going to massage that a little bit. The other thing we were going to try to do is set up some, coaching sessions where every week or every 2 weeks or every month, your core teams would log in. We'd have discussions and help you through the process. I don't know that there's going to be enough people that want that level of support. But again, what some people find helpful, at least the few initial core team meetings, is instead of just sitting there in the room staring at each other, sometimes having somebody there like me to facilitate what the next step is and answer questions is helpful. And if you get into that situation, please reach out. Or if you think that might be helpful. If I can collect, I don't know, 2, 3 for sites that want that level of support, we might schedule those things. But again, the pricing and the way we do it's going to have to be different. So again, I'm just explaining this because after we're done here, if you get into a situation where you feel like we'd like you to come in for one core team meeting and kick it off, we would like you to come in for a couple until we get through the hazard ID piece. Just think about that and ask me, and we'll think of a way to make that happen. The other area where you might want somebody just to help with, because you don't want to frankly mess with it, is after you get everything done, you might want somebody to come in and just do that first internal audit for you. And we can do that remotely. We can do it on site. We can figure out ways to get it done cheaper by working with your people and so forth. So that's my sales spiel. I just don't want you guys to feel like, well, we've got our templates, we had the training, now we're done. I think some of you are done. I think others of you may need help at different junctures. So, and I know getting the attention of Doug and Matt is tough because of how busy they are. So again, if you find yourself in that predicament, please reach out. I'll try to package up something that makes sense for you and makes sense for us. Okay. And you now know how to get a hold of me. And again, I say this all the time. A few people take me up on it. They contact me, they ask me questions. Please do not hesitate to reach out and ask me questions. So that is it for the training. Are there any questions at this point? Okay, so where am I going here? The last thing is you guys probably want training certificates. Well, to get a training certificate, you must take and pass the quiz. So hopefully you guys have all gotten copies of the ISO 45000 quiz. All I want to say about the quiz is don't sweat it. Again, remember, as with any quiz, it's okay to get some questions wrong. We just want some proof that you were paying attention, you've learned something, and that you indeed deserve a certificate. So I want each of you, again, to print out the quiz, print your name as you would like on your certificate. Then I'm going to ask each site leader to collect their quizzes and scan those and send those to me. And then based on that, and again, I don't anticipate anybody not passing. I'm a pretty liberal grader. We will send you guys certificates that demonstrate your training in the standard and also demonstrate your training in Lear's requirements. And that's really the last piece of business here. So again, I'd like to thank everybody. Your participation really does and did help, and that really helps. Thank you so much. At this point, if you have any questions, let me know. If not, get your quiz done and I'll get you a certificate.
I have one question.
Sure.
What's the answer to number 11?
Oh, come on.
I thought I'd try. You said any questions.
You think I'm going to answer the questions for you? What are the processes for the control? What processes for the control of changes need to be addressed? Permanent changes, temporary changes, product changes, or process changes? Or A, B, and C? Well, when I was in college, I used to, and I didn't know the answer. I always checked all the above.
Absolutely.
And
yes.
I think E sounds the closest to all the above. So yes, it doesn't, this standard does not deal with product safety. And I don't think I said that, so that's probably a good question. This standard deals with occupational health and safety. So there are standards out there for safety of our product, but that is not included in the scope of this system. So if I inadvertently answered that E might be the best answer, please don't hold it against me. Okay? Any other questions not related to the quiz?
Not related, huh?
You guys are sneaky. You're trying to get me to take the quiz for you. Okay. Well, again, I know we covered a lot of information very quickly because a lot of times I take 6 to 8 hours to cover this stuff. Doug beat me up and said it's got to be done in 4 because they're so busy. If you feel a little bit overwhelmed, that may be an appropriate feeling. And if you sleep on it tonight, you come back in, you're confused, you have questions, again, reach out to me. I love to answer questions. I'll schedule quick calls to, nudge you in the right direction. If it turns out you might need a little extra help, we're here to help. But again, don't feel like, well, guy, if I'm going to ask him a question, it's going to be a $1,000 invoice. No, that's not how it works. I want to help you guys make this as painless as possible. And if you do need help, I'm here. If you don't need help, we'll answer questions. And I do mean that. Other people say, you don't mean that. Well, of course I mean that. Lear has been very kind to me over the years, and I really appreciate that and want to work with you guys. So any other pearls of wisdom? If not, thank you for your time. Get me your quizzes so I can get you a certificate. And that's all I got. Thanks, guys.
Oh, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.